It was a typical Monday morning at Westbrook High School, where students rushed through the gates, talking about weekend plans and upcoming exams. Among them was Jessica, a smart and well-liked senior known for her bright smile and warm personality. Her friends always said she had a way of making everyone feel included. However, this Monday was different. Jessica didn't show up. Her absence was noticed immediately by her friends, who tried calling and texting her, but there was no response. At first, they assumed she was running late or had gotten sick. But as the day passed and Jessica still didn't appear, a sense of unease started spreading through the group. By lunchtime, rumors began circulating that something was wrong. Jessica wasn't the kind of girl to skip school without a reason. In the faculty room, the teachers began whispering too. Principal Harris took notice when Jessica's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Williams, mentioned her absence. She was usually punctual, and it was out of character for her to miss school without notice. By the end of the day, her parents had been contacted, and the situation escalated when they confirmed they hadn't heard from her since the previous night. The police were called in, and soon the entire school became a scene of concern. Jessica's friends were questioned about the last time they'd seen her. They all gave the same answer: Friday evening after school. No one had heard from her over the weekend. Officer Daniels, the lead investigator on the case, surveyed the school premises and interviewed staff. One of the last people to be questioned was the school's watchman, Smith. Handsome and composed, Smith had been working at Westbrook High for a couple of years. Always polite and helpful, he was well liked by students and staff alike. He explained that he hadn't noticed anything unusual that morning and that nothing suspicious had happened over the weekend. Smith calmly answered the officer's questions, his deep blue eyes betraying nothing. He said he saw Jessica leave school with her friends on Friday but hadn't noticed anything unusual after that. He was just doing his job, keeping watch, ensuring nothing suspicious occurred on the grounds. The police found nothing to suggest otherwise and moved on to other leads. The investigation continued, but there was little progress. Days passed, and Jessica's absence began to weigh heavily on the school. Her parents, devastated by the lack of news, held on to hope that their daughter would be found. Posters of Jessica's face were plastered across the town, but they only served as a reminder of her disappearance. Behind the scenes, something darker was at play. While the search for Jessica intensified, clues were scarce. No one had any idea of the horror lying beneath the surface of their school. And no one, not even the police, had any suspicion of the seemingly perfect watchman, who was quietly watching every move. The search for Jessica consumed the school. Her empty seat in classrooms was a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. Her friends tried to keep a brave face, but the worry gnawed at them. The teachers, too, were rattled, but they did their best to maintain an atmosphere of normalcy. Principal Harris held meetings with the staff every day, but despite their efforts, no new information came to light. The community started to fear the worst. Rumors about Jessica's disappearance spread like wildfire. Some believed she had run away, while others whispered about the possibility of a kidnapping. But no one could figure out why a bright girl like Jessica would vanish without a trace. The police remained involved, questioning anyone who might know something, but the investigation hit dead ends. Smith, the watchman, remained quietly in the background. His demeanor was calm, as always, never drawing too much attention to himself. His position allowed him to observe everyone, the students, teachers, and even the police officers who came to investigate. He watched them with an intensity that no one noticed. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set and most of the students had left the school grounds, Smith sat in his small office by the main gate. He gazed at the surveillance monitors, showing empty hallways and classrooms, then his eyes flickered to a separate monitor that no one else knew about. A hidden camera feed from the basement storage room, a part of the school where few ventured. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels decided to return, unannounced, late that night to take another look. There had to be something they were missing. That evening, after everyone had left, the school was eerily silent. The only light came from the watchman's small office. Smith was on his usual rounds, checking the gates and ensuring the school was secure for the night. He noticed Officer Daniels' car pull into the parking lot, but didn't react. He knew the officer's investigation had stalled, and tonight would be no different. Daniels walked through the darkened halls with a flashlight, carefully retracing his steps from earlier visits. He paused at the storage area in the basement, a part of the school he had overlooked before. Something about it felt off. Why had no one checked this area yet? He pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The room was filled with old supplies, dusty shelves, and forgotten equipment. There was no sign of anything unusual, but as he scanned the room with his flashlight, his beam flickered over a strange mark on the floor near a corner. Before Daniels could investigate further, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway. He quickly turned off his flashlight and hid behind a shelf. The door creaked open and Smith stepped into the room, his calm demeanor unchanged. He scanned the room as if sensing something, then slowly walked toward the corner where Daniels had been moments ago. The officer held his breath, his pulse quickening. Smith knelt down, running his hand over the strange mark on the floor, before slowly standing and leaving the room without a word. Closer to the truth, Officer Daniels couldn't shake the strange feeling from his encounter with Smith the previous night. There was something unsettling about the way the Watchman moved, almost as if he knew more than he was letting on. Daniels went back to the precinct the next morning, determined to dig deeper into the Watchman's background. "Hey Mark," Daniels called over to one of his colleagues. "You ever check out the staff at that school? What's their Watchman's story?" Mark raised an eyebrow. "You think the Watchman's involved? I didn't come across anything suspicious when I looked through their files. The guy's been there for a few years. Clean record." But Daniels wasn't convinced. There was something about Smith's behavior that night in the basement. His calm demeanor, the way he had inspected the storage room without hesitation, it all felt rehearsed, like he was always 2 steps ahead. Daniels decided to go through the staff records himself, focusing on Smith. He was sure there had to be something off about the man. As Daniels sifted through the school's personnel files, he found Smith's history to be remarkably ordinary. No criminal record, no complaints, nothing that would raise any alarms. But there was one odd thing, a gap of nearly 3 years before Smith started working at the school. There was no information about where he had been during that time. Meanwhile, at the school, life was starting to return to a semblance of normalcy. Classes resumed, and the students, though still shaken by Jessica's disappearance, tried to focus on their studies. But the halls felt colder, emptier without her presence. Every so often, her friends would glance at her locker, still untouched, as if waiting for her to return. Smith, as always, was a silent observer. He watched the students with an almost detached interest, his eyes lingering just a little too long on some of them. But no one noticed. To them, he was just the watchman, going about his duties as usual. One afternoon, Daniels returned to the school, determined to find out more. He casually questioned a few students about the staff, particularly Smith. Most of them didn't have much to say. He was just the guy who opened the gate, checked their IDs, and made sure the school was secure. Nothing suspicious. But then he spoke to one of Jessica's closest friends, Emily, who had been particularly upset about her disappearance. "Did you ever notice anything strange about Smith?" Daniels asked, trying to sound casual. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting to the side before she spoke. "I don't know. It's probably nothing. But Jessica used to say he creeped her out sometimes. She didn't like the way he looked at her. Said he was always watching, like, too closely." Daniel's instincts flared. There it was, a small but significant detail. Jessica had noticed something off about Smith. That couldn't be a coincidence. But without any concrete evidence, all Daniels had was suspicion. He needed more. That night, Daniels decided to return to the school again. He had to figure out what Smith was hiding. But this time, he wasn't going to make his presence known. If Smith had something to do with Jessica's disappearance, he wasn't going to give the man a chance to cover his tracks. As Daniels made his way through the darkened halls, he felt the weight of the silence pressing down on him. He knew he was getting closer to the truth, but with each step, he also knew he was putting himself in danger. The school at night felt like a different world, eerie, silent, and heavy with secrets. Officer Daniels, careful to remain unnoticed, slipped through the shadows, his eyes scanning every corner of the building. He felt it deep in his gut. There was something here, some clue that would crack the case wide open. but he had to move cautiously. If Smith was involved, Daniels didn't want to spook him before gathering enough evidence. He crept towards the maintenance area, the place where Smith spent most of his time during the night shifts. There was something about the basement that had stuck with Daniels since his first visit. Something wasn't right about the way Smith had reacted. As Daniels approached the basement door, he felt a chill crawl down his spine. The door creaked slightly as he pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. His flashlight beam cut through the black, revealing old janitorial supplies and tools stacked haphazardly on metal shelves. The air was thick with the scent of dust and mildew, but there was something else, a faint metallic odor that made Daniels uneasy. He stepped deeper into the room, moving cautiously until his beam landed on a large, rusted locker in the far corner. It was slightly ajar. Daniels moved closer, his heart pounding as he opened the locker further. Inside, there were items that didn't belong: a folded school uniform, a pair of sneakers, and, his breath caught, a backpack. Jessica's backpack. He recognized it from the photos her parents had provided. It had been with her when she disappeared. This was it, the break in the case he had been looking for, but as Daniels reached for his phone to call for backup, a faint sound behind him made him freeze. Footsteps, light but deliberate, echoed down the hallway outside. He turned off his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, straining to hear. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped just outside the door. Daniel's pulse quickened. Whoever it was, they were right outside. He gripped his flashlight tighter, preparing for the worst. The door slowly creaked open and a figure stepped inside. Daniels could see the silhouette. It was Smith. For a moment, Smith stood still, as if listening. Then, without a word, he stepped towards the rusted locker. Daniels held his breath, praying that Smith wouldn't notice him in the dark corner of the room. Smith knelt down in front of the locker, inspecting the contents, his face a mask of calm. He seemed to study the backpack, his fingers grazing its fabric lightly. It was as if he were reminiscing. Daniels felt a surge of anger and disgust. This man had something to do with Jessica's disappearance, he was sure of it. But he couldn't act yet, he needed more. As Smith began to close the locker, Daniels made a quick decision. He couldn't let this moment slip away. Quietly, he reached for his phone again, snapping a picture of Smith as he stood over the backpack. But just as he captured the photo, Smith's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto Daniel's hiding place. There was a tense moment of silence, and then, without warning, Smith bolted for the door. Daniels sprang into action, chasing after him, but by the time he reached the hallway, Smith had already disappeared into the night. Daniels cursed under his breath. He had been so close, but at least now he had something, proof that Smith had been in the basement, near Jessica's belongings. It wasn't enough to make an arrest, but it was a start. As Daniels left the school that night, his mind raced with questions. What was Smith hiding, and how much danger was he willing to risk to keep his secret safe? Whatever the answer, Daniels knew one thing for sure: he was on the right track, but time was running out. Jessica's fate, and possibly the fates of others, depended on what he uncovered next. The investigation into Jessica's disappearance gripped the school. The atmosphere in the hallways was thick with fear and suspicion, students whispering nervously, while teachers struggled to maintain calm. Posters of Jessica's smiling face hung on every bulletin board, serving as a stark contrast to the dread that loomed over the campus. Smith, the school's watchman, maintained his usual calm demeanor. Every day he stood by the gates, greeting students and staff, watching the subtle interactions that revealed much about those who passed him by. To everyone, he seemed like the ever-reliable figure of authority, steady and trustworthy. But Smith's mind was always 2 steps ahead. He observed the police coming and going, collecting evidence from the school grounds, but they hadn't found anything significant yet. Smith had ensured that. He knew every hidden corner of the campus, every blind spot, and every escape route. His presence was unnoticed, blending seamlessly into the background as the investigation grew more desperate. Inside his modest apartment, Smith meticulously kept his routine. He kept journals, not of his life, but of his victims. Detailed accounts of his encounters, their habits, their fears, and the moments they realized they wouldn't survive. Jessica's entry was the latest, her page marked with a red ribbon, unfinished for now. Meanwhile, Jessica's closest friends were in turmoil. Some believed she had run away, while others feared the worst. Emma, who had been particularly close to Jessica, refused to believe that she would simply vanish. She became obsessed with trying to find out what really happened, going through Jessica's notes, messages, and even talking to the janitors and maintenance staff. Everyone but Smith. The police focused their efforts on the school's surroundings, interviewing people at nearby stores, checking surveillance footage. No one thought to look inward, and that was Smith's advantage. He overheard bits and pieces of the investigation as the officers discussed potential suspects, yet his name never came up. The thrill of being unseen, even in plain sight, fueled his quiet confidence. Then, something unexpected happened. Emma, during her obsessive search, began to recall a strange moment with Smith. One late afternoon, she had seen him speaking with Jessica just days before her disappearance. It had seemed innocent then, but now, as she replayed the memory in her mind, something felt off. The way Jessica had looked uncomfortable, how Smith had leaned in too close. Emma couldn't shake the feeling, but when she mentioned it to the authorities, they shrugged it off. The Watchman? No way, they said. He's been here for years, nothing suspicious about him. Emma didn't push it at first, but the thought lingered in her mind. As days turned into weeks, the search for Jessica faded, but Emma remained relentless. She began to dig deeper, questioning fellow students and staff about their encounters with Smith. The Watchman was always friendly and courteous, but Emma sensed a darkness behind his charming facade. She started gathering snippets of information, compiling a list of peculiar behaviors and moments that raised her suspicions. One afternoon, while searching through the school's old records, Emma discovered a chilling incident. Years ago, a similar disappearance had occurred. A girl had vanished from the very same school, never to be found. The case had gone cold, and the Watchman at that time was also named Smith. The name struck Emma like a bolt of lightning, sending shivers down her spine. Determined to connect the dots, Emma confronted her friends, urging them to look deeper. But most dismissed her concerns, attributing her fears to paranoia. "He's just doing his job," they insisted, shaking their heads. This only fueled her resolve. She couldn't let Jessica's memory slip away. Late one night, unable to sleep, Emma ventured to the school to gather evidence on her own. With a flashlight in hand, she crept through the dark hallways, listening for any sounds. The echoes of her footsteps felt amplified in the silence. As she explored, she remembered Jessica's excitement about a secret spot behind the gym where they used to hang out, an old, forgotten storage shed. When she reached the shed, she hesitated, feeling a sense of dread. The door creaked open, revealing a musty space filled with broken furniture and dust. As she shone her flashlight around, her heart raced. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. A pile of discarded clothes that looked eerily familiar. Just as she was about to examine them, she heard footsteps approaching. Panic surged through her veins, and she quickly ducked behind a stack of old crates. She held her breath, praying to remain hidden as the footsteps grew closer. Smith entered the shed, his figure outlined against the faint light from the hallway. He didn't seem to notice the open door or the faint sounds of movement. Instead, he rummaged through the clutter, muttering to himself. Emma couldn't believe her eyes. Was he hiding something? She strained to hear what he was saying. "They will never find her," he whispered, a chilling smile creeping across his face. Not like the others. Emma's heart sank. The realization hit her like a wave. Smith was the killer. He had gotten away with it before, and now he was continuing his dark pattern. She needed to escape and gather evidence. She couldn't confront him now. As she carefully backed away, she accidentally knocked over a small metal object, sending it clattering to the ground. Smith's head snapped in her direction, his eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice low and dangerous. Emma's heart raced as she turned to flee, sprinting back through the dark hallways. She could hear him chasing her, the sound of his footsteps echoing behind her. She burst through the doors and into the open air, not daring to look back until she was safely outside the school. Panting heavily, she reached her bike, heart pounding in her chest. She had to tell someone, and she had to do it fast. Smith was dangerous, and she now had proof. That night, Emma gathered her courage and called the police, relaying everything she had witnessed. But as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. What if Smith knew? What if he was already tracking her? The thought made her shiver, but she had to stay strong for Jessica. The truth needed to come out. The next morning, Emma felt a mix of determination and dread. After her call to the police, she felt hopeful, but also terrified. She couldn't shake the feeling that Smith was aware of her investigation. She arrived at school, scanning the hallways for any sign of him. As the morning bell rang, students filled the corridors, but Emma's mind was elsewhere, consumed with thoughts of Jessica and the hidden truths surrounding Smith. She decided to meet with the officer assigned to Jessica's case. They had spoken briefly the previous night, but Emma felt it necessary to share her findings in person. Detectives experienced and had seen too many cases slip away due to lack of evidence or unwilling witnesses. Emma hoped she could convince him to take her seriously. After school, she made her way to the police station. Detective listened intently as she recounted her experience in the storage shed. "I can't believe this has happened before," she said, trembling with urgency. "Smith has a pattern. He's a serial killer." Detectives took a deep breath, contemplating her words. "We need to verify your claims, Emma. If what you say is true, we may need to conduct a thorough investigation into Smith's background." He pulled out a notepad and started writing. "Can you give me a description of the clothes you saw in that shed?" As she detailed her memory, Emma's mind raced with fear. What if Smith knew she was talking to the police? What if he had already tracked her? But she couldn't allow fear to dictate her actions. She had to be brave for Jessica. Detectives promised to follow up on her information. "If what you're saying holds up, we'll have to act quickly. But I need you to be cautious. Keep your head down, don't confront him again, and don't let him know you're onto him." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of resolve. She had to stay vigilant. She left the police station with a mixture of hope and anxiety, but as she rode her bike home, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, as darkness enveloped the town, Emma sat in her room, unable to sleep. She glanced out the window, scanning the street for any sign of Smith. Each car that passed made her heart race, but she saw nothing unusual. Just as she was about to turn away, she caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure near the school gates. Her breath hitched. It was Smith. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and quickly dialed Detective. "He's here." "Smith is outside the school," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Stay on the line, Emma. I'm dispatching units to your location," he said, his voice calm but urgent. Emma watched through her window as Smith lingered near the school entrance, occasionally glancing around as if waiting for someone. The shadows danced around him, and for a moment he looked like a predator, waiting for his next victim. As she stayed on the line, she heard the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Smith's demeanor shifted. He looked alert and anxious. Emma could see him scanning the area, and then, in an instant, he turned and disappeared down the street. "He's gone. I lost him," she exclaimed into the phone, her heart racing. "Stay where you are. Officers will be there soon," Detective assured her. A few moments later, 2 police cars pulled up outside her home. Emma rushed outside to meet them, explaining everything again. The officers took her statement and assured her they would look into Smith's whereabouts. As the officers drove off to search for Smith, Emma returned inside, feeling a strange mix of fear and empowerment. The truth was coming closer, but she had to stay vigilant. She knew she had to protect herself and, most importantly, Jessica's memory. That night, Emma decided to take matters into her own hands. She would gather more evidence. She began researching Smith's background online, searching for any clues that might link him to the previous disappearance or any other suspicious activities. What she uncovered chilled her to the bone. There were multiple reports of girls going missing from various schools in the area over the last decade, and each time a watchman named Smith was either involved or present. The pattern was undeniable, but it wasn't enough to convince the authorities. Emma realized she needed to find something concrete, something that would ensure Smith was stopped once and for all. As the clock ticked away into the night, Emma began to formulate a plan. She would confront Smith one last time, but this time she would do it with caution. She wouldn't be alone. She would have proof and support. Tomorrow she would gather her friends and approach Smith, hoping to lure him out and expose the monster hiding in plain sight. The next day, Emma gathered her closest friends at her house to share her plan. They met in her living room, the atmosphere tense with anticipation. Emma explained everything she had uncovered about Smith, from the missing girls to his suspicious behavior. "We need to confront him," she said firmly, "but we have to do it smart. We can't let him know we're onto him." Mia's eyes widened. "Are you sure that's a good idea? What if he gets angry?" "I understand the risk," Emma replied, her voice steady, "but we can't just sit back and do nothing. He's dangerous, and we need to protect ourselves and anyone else he might target. We can take a group with us to the school after hours. If things go south, we can call the police." After much deliberation, her friends agreed. They were scared, but they felt a sense of duty to help Emma and honor Jessica's memory. They planned to meet at the school just after sunset, armed with their phones to record everything. As night fell, a heavy fog enveloped the school, giving it an eerie atmosphere. Emma's heart raced as they approached the building, their breaths visible in the cool air. With every step, she felt a mix of fear and determination. They made their way to the storage shed where Emma had seen the ominous clothing. The group huddled together, whispering and checking their phones for any signs of Smith. "What if he's already here?" Jake asked, glancing nervously around the dimly lit area. "Then we'll be ready," Emma replied, gripping her phone tightly. "We'll catch him in the act." As they stood in the shadows, waiting, Emma's mind raced. She replayed every detail she had learned about Smith and his past victims. Suddenly, the stillness of the night was interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. "Is that him?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. They all turned their attention to the source of the noise. As the figure approached, it was Smith, strolling casually as if he owned the place. He wore a dark jacket and had his usual charming smile, but Emma could see a glint of something sinister in his eyes. "Hey, kids, what are you doing out here?" Smith called out, feigning innocence. Emma swallowed hard. "We were just, looking for something," she stammered, trying to buy time. "Looking for something? In a place like this? How interesting." He stepped closer, his demeanor shifting as he assessed the group. "You shouldn't be out here alone. It's dangerous at night." "Funny coming from you," Emma retorted, trying to mask her fear with bravado. His expression darkened. "What did you say?" Before Emma could respond, Mia stepped forward. "We know about you, Smith. About the girls who've gone missing. We know you're involved." Smith's facade cracked for a moment, and his smile faded. "You kids have been watching too many horror movies. You shouldn't believe everything you hear." Emma raised her phone, ready to record. "We're not afraid of you. We're exposing you." With that, a tense silence fell between them. Smith's eyes narrowed as he realized they weren't backing down. "You think you can intimidate me? You're just kids playing detective." The atmosphere grew heavy with unease as Emma's friends moved closer together. Just then, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Emma's heart raced. Had someone called the police? Smith's expression changed as he glanced toward the sound. "You think the police will save you?" He took a step back, preparing to flee. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Don't you dare run," Emma shouted, but he was already moving away, disappearing into the shadows. "Call the police," Emma yelled, her voice rising in panic. Jake quickly dialed 911 while Mia and Tara kept their eyes peeled for Smith. The group split up, trying to corner him, but he was too quick. He darted between the trees surrounding the school, his dark figure barely visible in the fog. "Where did he go?" Tara shouted, her voice filled with fear. Just then, the police arrived, their lights illuminating the area and cutting through the darkness. Emma waved her arms, desperate to guide them toward Smith. "He's this way." The officers jumped out of their vehicles, flashlights in hand, and began searching the area. Emma led them toward the direction Smith had fled. As they rounded the corner of the school, they spotted him trying to escape. "Stop right there," one of the officers commanded. Smith hesitated, realizing he had nowhere to run. The officers quickly apprehended him, cuffing him and pulling him to the ground. "You made a big mistake, kid," Smith spat, glaring at Emma as he was led away. "You have no idea what you've just done." Emma felt a mix of triumph and fear. "I know exactly what you are," she said, her voice steady. With Smith in custody, Emma finally felt a sense of relief wash over her. The truth was out, and Jessica's memory would not be forgotten.